There are things you don't expect to learn at 63. You think by that age you've already seen the hard stuff. You've buried parents, watched friendships fade, survived the kind of slow financial scares that leave marks. You think you know the shape of loss by now. You don't expect it to walk in wearing a familiar face, sitting across from you at your own kitchen table asking if you want more coffee. I was 63 years old, retired 18 months from a 31-year career in municipal water management in Tucson, Arizona. I'd spent 3 decades making sure other people's infrastructure held together. Systems, pressure, flow. You learn to spot where things are about to give. I thought I was good at that. Turns out I was only good at it when it wasn't my own life. My wife and I had been married for 31 years. We met when I was still driving a rusted Chevy and she was finishing a nursing degree. We weren't passionate in the Hollywood sense. We were solid. That was the word I always used. Solid. 2 kids grown and out of the house. A daughter in Phoenix, a son in Oregon. A house we'd paid off 6 years ago. A retirement account that wasn't flashy but was careful, because I'd always been careful. I thought we were the same kind of people. I thought we wanted the same quiet. My youngest brother had been my closest friend since childhood, 18 months younger than me, which meant we'd shared almost everything growing up. A bedroom, a paper route, the same high school, even the same group of friends for years after. He'd been the best man at my wedding. I'd been his twice. We talked on the phone every Sunday without fail. We fished together every September up in the White Mountains. He knew me the way only someone who'd watched you fail and get back up can know a person. He'd been divorced for 4 years, living alone in Scottsdale, 40 minutes from us. We had dinner with him most months. My wife always said he needed looking after. She was right about that, at least. The morning I found out, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a party or a confrontation or a moment I could have seen coming. It was a Tuesday. I was in the garage reorganizing a shelf of old paint cans when my daughter called from Phoenix. She'd been crying, I could tell, though she was trying to hold it together for me. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something and I don't know how to say it, so I'm just going to say it." I set down the can I was holding. She'd seen them 2 weeks earlier. A restaurant in Scottsdale she'd gone to with a friend from work. My wife and my brother in a corner booth, and it wasn't dinner between family. She said she'd sat in her car for 45 minutes afterward trying to convince herself she was wrong. She wasn't wrong. I didn't speak for a long moment. "How long have you known?" I asked. 2 weeks. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know how. I kept thinking maybe I should say something to her first, or maybe—" "It's okay," I said. "I meant it. She hadn't done anything wrong." I went back inside. My wife was upstairs. I could hear her moving around, the familiar sounds of her getting ready to go somewhere. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the coffee maker, still half full from the morning. Everything in the kitchen was exactly where it had always been. The copper rooster on the windowsill she'd bought at a craft fair in Sedona. The calendar on the fridge with my fishing trip still circled in red marker. The mug my son had given me that said, "World's okayest, Dad." I poured myself a cup and sat down. My wife came downstairs 20 minutes later, dressed nicely, said she was meeting a friend from her old hospital unit for lunch. She kissed me on the cheek. Quick, light, automatic. I said, "Have a good time." She picked up her keys and left. I sat there until the coffee went cold. The thing about 31 years is that it doesn't vanish in an instant. The love doesn't evaporate the second you learn something true. It curdles slowly, like something left out too long. You still reach for it out of habit, and then you remember, and then your hand just stops mid-air. I called my daughter back that evening. She answered on the first ring. "Don't say anything to your mother yet," I told her. "Don't say anything to your brother. I need a few days." "Dad." "I know," I said. "I just need to understand what I'm actually dealing with before I react to it." She agreed reluctantly. I could tell she wanted me to explode, to give her permission to be furious on my behalf. I wasn't ready to give anyone that yet. I needed to think. That night I lay awake and went through the last 2 years in my head. The trips she'd taken to visit her sister in Albuquerque that had seemed more frequent than before. The way she'd become protective of her phone, not hiding it exactly, just more careful with it. The Sunday calls with my brother that had started running shorter. He used to talk for an hour. Lately, he'd been wrapping up in 20 minutes, always something he had to get to. I hadn't added it up because I hadn't wanted to. In the morning, I drove to a bank branch where I didn't usually do my business. I asked to sit with a financial advisor, and I spent an hour reviewing exactly what we had and where it was. What was joint, what was mine, what was hers, checking, savings, the retirement accounts. A money market account I'd almost forgotten about that had about 40,000 in it. I'd been the one managing our finances for years. My wife had always said numbers made her eyes cross. She knew how to use the debit card and not much else, she'd say, and I'd always found that a little endearing. Now I was sitting in a beige office in a strip mall in Tucson, trying to figure out if I actually believed that anymore. Everything looked intact. Nothing had moved. But I asked the advisor, quietly and carefully, what the process would look like if someone wanted to move funds without the other account holder being notified. He explained the protections. I listened. I came home and said nothing. On the third day, I called a number I hadn't dialed in 12 years. An old colleague from my county work, a woman named Irene who'd left municipal and gone into family law. We'd always gotten along. Direct, no theater. That was how she operated. I liked that. I explained the situation without editorializing. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked me 3 questions. How long had I been aware? Whether I had documentation of anything? Whether I wanted to separate or reconcile? I sat with the third question longer than she expected. I don't know yet, I said, but I need to know what I'm entitled to before I decide anything. She gave me an appointment for the following Monday. Then she said something that stayed with me. She said, the worst thing you can do right now is tip your hand before you understand what's in it. I wrote that down after I hung up. On day 4, my brother called for our Sunday call, which had slipped to Thursday this week for some reason he didn't explain. His voice was easy and familiar, and exactly the same as it had always been. He asked about my fishing trip. He told me a story about a neighbor's dog getting into his trash cans. He laughed at his own joke the same way he always had. I laughed too, not because it was funny, because I needed him not to know. After we hung up, I sat in the garage for a long time. The grief wasn't about the marriage. I'd already started to feel the edges of that loss, and it was real and it was heavy. But it wasn't what broke open in me sitting in that garage. It was my brother's voice, the ease of it, the way he'd sounded like himself when I no longer knew who that was. 31 years of marriage can be explained, at least partially, by the slow drift 2 people do when they stop paying attention to each other. I wasn't innocent of that. I knew it. But my brother had sat next to me at my father's funeral. He'd held my hand when my mother couldn't remember my name anymore in the last months of her life. He'd been the one I called from the hospital parking lot when my son broke his arm at 12 years old because I needed someone to tell me it was going to be fine. You don't do those things with someone and then do this. There was no snowdrift to explain it. There was just a choice. I couldn't make sense of it in the garage. I stopped trying. On day 5, my daughter drove up from Phoenix unannounced. She pulled into the driveway just before noon. I was outside with the garden hose and I looked up and saw her getting out of the car, and for a second I thought I might actually cry. I hadn't cried yet. I hadn't been able to get there. She came over and hugged me without saying anything for a long moment. How are you doing? She asked, into my shoulder. I'm vertical, I said. She laughed a little, and so did I, and it helps more than I expected. We sat in the backyard. She brought coffee from the truck stop on the highway, the way I liked it, just cream. We didn't talk about her mother right away. We talked about her job, her apartment, a weekend trip she'd taken with friends, normal things. I let it go on for a while, because it felt good to be in a conversation that didn't have a wrong answer. Then she put her cup down and looked at me. She said she'd done something. She said she hoped I wasn't angry. She'd talked to a friend of hers, a man who ran a small private investigation firm, not to hire him exactly, but just to ask, off the record. She said her friend had told her that in cases like this, what mattered wasn't emotion, it was documentation, that if there was any financial exposure, and she looked at me carefully when she said that, The time to establish a paper trail was before anything became official. She slid a piece of paper across the patio table toward me, a list of the records I should pull together, bank statements going back 2 years, insurance policies, the deed on the house, any joint accounts, any retirement vehicles. I looked at the list. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. "Since I sat in that parking lot in Scottsdale," she said. I thought about being bothered by that. I wasn't. She'd been protecting me the way she knew how to. I recognized the instinct. It came from me. My wife came home that afternoon while my daughter was still there. The moment in the kitchen when she walked in and saw us both was quiet but not comfortable. My wife looked at my daughter. My daughter looked back. Something passed between them that I wasn't fully part of. My wife said it was nice she'd come up. She said she was tired. She was going to lie down for a bit. She went upstairs. We heard her bedroom door close. My daughter looked at me across the kitchen counter. Her face said everything she didn't say out loud. I nodded. "I know," I told her. She left before dinner, hugged me in the driveway for a long time. I went back inside. My wife came down around 7. We ate together. She made the kind of small talk that doesn't need anyone to actually be present. She asked if I needed anything from the grocery store tomorrow. I said we were low on orange juice. She wrote it on the notepad by the fridge. We watched television. She fell asleep on the couch before 10. I turned the TV off and sat in the dark for a while before I went upstairs. I didn't sleep. What I thought about in the dark was this: there's a particular loneliness in discovering you've been the last to know. It isn't just pain. It's a retroactive erasure. Every moment of the past year or 2 years repaints itself into something new, and not one of those new versions includes you. You were there, but you were furniture, steady and present and requiring no particular maintenance. I'd thought that was what a good marriage looked like from the inside. I didn't understand until now that I was the only one still living in it. I met with Irene the following Monday. She was the same as she'd always been, practical and calm. With reading glasses she kept pushing up, and the yellow legal pad she filled in a neat, slanted hand. She went through everything. Arizona is a community property state, she explained. 31 years of marriage, retirement accounts accumulated during the marriage, the house, all of it would factor in. She was methodical and clear, and when I left her office I had a folder of notes and a cleaner understanding of what my actual life looked like on paper. I came home and made a pot of chili. I do that when I need to do something with my hands. That evening my wife said she was going to Albuquerque the following weekend. Her sister needed help with something around the house. She said it casually, over the chili, not meeting my eyes while she said it, just focused on her bowl. I said that was fine. I said I'd probably go out to the White Mountains while she was gone, maybe do some early scouting for September. She said that sounded nice. We went to bed. I drove to the White Mountains, but I didn't fish. I sat in my truck on the access road to the campsite I'd been going to since I was 28 years old, and I let myself feel the full weight of what was coming. The pines were still. The air was cold in the morning, the kind of sharp cold that cuts through even good outerwear, and it helped somehow, being cold and clear in a place that had nothing to do with any of this. I called my son from up there. He'd heard nothing, not from his sister, not from anyone. I told him. The phone went very quiet. Then he said, "Dad, what do you need?" Not what are you going to do, not how could she, not what about him, just what you need. I thought I'd get through the conversation without breaking. I didn't quite make it. He said he could drive down from Oregon. I told him not yet, not until I'd done what I needed to do. He said okay. He said he'd wait. He said call me anytime, 3 in the morning. He meant it. I believed him. When I came back from the mountains, my wife had returned from Albuquerque. She seemed lighter than she'd been, easier in her movements. She'd brought back green chili from a place she liked, she said. She put it in the freezer. I thanked her. That night I told her I needed to talk to her about something. We sat at the kitchen table. I didn't make an event of it. I didn't raise my voice. I said I knew about her and my brother, and I knew it had been going on for a while, and I'd spoken with an attorney, and I thought it was time we talked about what came next. She went very still. For a moment I thought she might deny it. I'd prepared for that. I had my daughter's eyewitness account. I had the documentation Irene had walked me through. I had the records I'd pulled together. I didn't need to threaten any of it. I just needed her to know it existed. She didn't deny it. She put her hands flat on the table, one on each side of her coffee mug, and she looked at the table and she said she was sorry, that it had started 2 years ago, that she hadn't planned for it to go on the way it did, that she hadn't known how to stop. I listened. Then she looked up at me, and I saw that she'd been carrying the stew and that it had cost her something, and I understood that in a distant and factual way without it changing anything about where we were sitting. I said, I believe that it was complicated for you. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't part of why things got to this point. But you made choices, and you made them with my brother, and I can't find my way around that part. She started to cry, not theatrically, just quietly the way people cry when they're not performing it for anyone. I handed her a napkin from the holder by the stove. She asked me if there was any way we could try, any possibility. I thought about it. I gave it a real moment, not a dismissive one. Then I said no. She moved into the guest room that night. My brother called 3 days later. He'd heard, obviously. He'd heard from her, I assumed, though I didn't ask. He called on a Thursday, not a Sunday, and when I answered, he said my name like a question, like he wasn't sure who would be on the other end. I let him say what he'd called to say. He said he was sorry. He said he knew that wasn't enough. He said he'd been a coward, and he'd known it while it was happening, and he hadn't stopped. He said he'd understand if I never wanted to speak to him again. I said I appreciated him calling. Then I said I needed time before I knew what I wanted to do with any of it, and I'd let him know. He said okay. He said he loved me. He's always said that at the end of calls, our whole lives. I said okay. I hung up and sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. There's a thing that happens after. People assume you'll be consumed by anger, that you'll want to burn things down, make noise, make people understand how badly they've behaved. But anger isn't what comes for me. What comes is a quieter and more persistent thing. It's the reorganization. Your whole sense of your own life reshuffles, and you have to find out what's still true and what needs to be let go, and it's slow work that doesn't have a schedule. The divorce proceedings were handled through Irene and a mediator my wife's attorney recommended. Arizona, being a community property state, made the fundamentals straightforward, if not painless. We sold the house. I took my half and bought a smaller place on the east side of Tucson, 3 bedrooms, a garage I didn't need but liked having, a backyard with enough space for a garden I wasn't sure I'd plant. My retirement account stayed mine. We divided the joint savings, the money market, the investment account, everything cleanly and without spectacle. It took 9 months start to finish. My wife moved to Scottsdale. I want to be precise here about what I feel, because people often expect survivors of this kind of thing to speak in absolutes. I don't hate her. I don't hate my brother. What I feel for both of them is something more like grief with distance built into it, like looking at a photograph of a place you used to love that you know you'll never go back to. The place was real. The feeling you had there was real, but it's not yours anymore. My daughter came and helped me unpack the new house. She brought her husband, and the two of them carried boxes while I stood in the middle of the living room, trying to decide where to put a lamp I'd owned for 15 years. He's a good man, my son-in-law. He doesn't say much, but he carried every heavy thing without being asked, and he made sure I had a beer in my hand by 4 in the afternoon. I'm grateful for him. My son drove down from Oregon the week after. He stayed for 5 days. We drove up to the mountains and actually fished this time. We talked some and were quiet. Some and both were fine. He reminds me of myself at his age in ways that sometimes make me proud and sometimes make me worry for him. He's careful with his feelings, which can be a strength and a problem depending on the year. I'm in therapy now. I started 6 months after the separation was finalized. I wasn't in crisis, nothing like that. But I'd spent a lot of years being the steady one, the infrastructure person, the one who made sure the system held together. And somewhere in all of that, I'd stopped paying attention to whether I was actually okay or just operational. Those aren't the same thing. I didn't know the difference for a long time. My therapist is a man about 10 years younger than me, straightforward and unimpressed by deflection, which I respect. He asked me in our third session what I would have done differently if I'd known sooner. I said I'd have confronted it earlier. He asked if I was sure. I thought about it for a while. Then I said no. I think I would have tried to fix something that couldn't be fixed, and I would have lost myself in that attempt. Sometimes the slower road is the one that gets you somewhere real. I still go to the White Mountains every September. I went alone last year for the first time in decades. It was quiet in a way that took some adjusting to, but by the second morning I'd settled into it. The pines were the same, the air was the same. The river was lower than usual because of the drought, but it was still there, still moving. I sat on a rock and drank coffee from a thermos and watched the water. Here is what I know now that I didn't fully know before. Steadiness isn't the same as presence. You can maintain a household, show up for every obligation, never raise your voice or miss a payment or forget a birthday, and still be absent in the ways that matter most. I was good at the structure and less good at the being there. That's not an excuse for what happened. People who feel unseen have other choices they can make. But I don't get to pretend I wasn't part of the ecosystem that let things go wrong. I'm not trying to be noble about this. I'm 64 years old, and I live in a smaller house, and I eat dinner alone most nights and some days. That is simply what it is, and some days it lands harder than others. Grief doesn't have a completion date. It has rhythms. But I'm not operating on two levels anymore. I'm not maintaining the surface while something different runs underneath. Everything in my life right now is what it appears to be. That's worth more than I would have said it was worth 2 years ago. My son called last Sunday. We talked for almost an hour. He's thinking about coming down for Thanksgiving, maybe bringing a friend he wants me to meet. I said I'd make the chili. He laughed and said he'd been counting on it. After I hung up, I stood at the kitchen window for a while. The backyard was turning gold the way October does in Tucson, the light going sideways and everything it touched, looking a little more considered. I have tomato plants I actually got around to putting in. They did better than I expected for a first year. There's a version of loss that breaks you, and there's a version that strips things down until you can see what was load-bearing all along. I can't tell you which kind this was while I was in the middle of it. I can only tell you what I found on the other side of it, and what I found was smaller and quieter, and more honestly mine than anything I've been holding on to before. That's enough. On most days, that's exactly enough. I used to think that being steady was the same as being good, that if you showed up, paid the bills, never raised your voice, never left, that counted for something permanent, that it built a kind of wall around the life you'd made. I believed that for a long time. I believed it the way you believe in the foundation of a house you never actually inspected. What I know now is that steadiness without presence is just maintenance, and you can maintain something for decades while it quietly becomes something else entirely. My wife didn't leave because I was a bad man. My brother didn't do what he did because he was purely reckless. The causes were quieter than that and more honest and harder to sit with. Two people who drifted, found their way to each other through a gap I'd helped create by being reliable in every way except the one that mattered most. Actually being there, paying attention, asking the harder questions before they became unanswerable. That's not an excuse for their choices. They made choices. But causes matter if you're trying to understand something rather than just survive it. What I'm most grateful for, and I mean this, is that I didn't react the morning my daughter called. I sat in that kitchen with cold coffee, and I chose to think before I moved. That choice didn't come from coldness. It came from something I'd spent 63 years building without knowing it had a name. The discipline to know the difference between a reaction and a decision. My daughter had given me information. Information isn't a command. I got to decide what to do with it. I called Irene. I pulled the financial records. I took the drive to the mountains and let myself feel the full weight of it before I spoke a word to my wife. By the time I sat across from her at that kitchen table, I knew what I had, I knew what I needed, and I knew what I was going to say. That clarity protected me. It kept the conversation from becoming a wound that neither of us could find our way back from. There's a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It looks like patience. It looks like a man reorganizing paint cans in a garage, or sitting alone on a rock by a river that's lower than it used to be. But underneath that stillness is a person choosing, over and over, to face something true rather than defend against it. That's not weakness. That's the harder road. Anyone can explode. It takes something more to stay in your own skin and move deliberately. My son called last Sunday. An hour, easy. He's coming for Thanksgiving. I'll make the chili. The tomatoes in the backyard did better than I expected for a first year. I don't live a large life right now, but every part of it is real, and every part of it is mine. That's what's left when you stop building around something that was never quite solid to begin with. Not wreckage, just the true shape of what was always there, waiting to be seen clearly. That turns out to be enough.